I gotta do this joke again because it's funny. By the way, Kathy, these are stickers. And I got mugs coming.
All right.
Okay, so late one night, a preacher was driving on a country road and had a wreck. Farmer stopped and said, "Sir, are you okay?" Preacher said, "Yes, I had the Lord riding with me." The farmer said, "Well, you better let him ride with me because you're going to kill him." Have you heard about the new restaurant called Karma? There is no menu. You get what you deserve. Okay, so we're in 1 Kings chapter 3. We'll start with verses 1 through 3 in the English Standard. We've got Solomon's reign established. You know, he had to kill a whole bunch of people off, I think like 4. And make sure that everybody knew he was a peacemaker, not a peacekeeper. And now it's time to start expanding, etc., etc. And so we have an interesting marriage alliance. And the reason I say it's interesting is the Lord told the Israelites never go back to Egypt. That was a big deal. One reason he didn't want kings to acquire horses was they'd have to go to Egypt to get them. I mean, that's in Deuteronomy. And so here we have in verse 1, Solomon made a marriage alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt. He took Pharaoh's daughter and brought her into the city of David until he had finished building his own house and the house of the Lord and the wall around Jerusalem. The people were sacrificing at the high places, however, because no house had yet been built for the name of the Lord. Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of David his father, only he sacrificed and made offerings at the high places. So, the marriage alliance, or the marriage that Solomon did with Pharaoh was a treaty. It was a political move to join the two houses. I don't know what on earth, quite frankly, Solomon was thinking. Again, it's like, why would you marry into the country that the Lord said don't even go back to? I mean, if you look at Isaac, and during the famine, he was going to go to Egypt, and the Lord said, "No, do not go down to Egypt. Instead, I want you to plant what you have here in this land." And so he planted in a drought and had 100-fold return. So no rain, no nothing. And so that's the level that the Lord placed on not relying on that country. And I think it's, number one, it's a indicator of putting your trust in a superpower. Putting your trust in a nation other than the Lord. And anytime you saw kings do that, he was not happy. It usually ended up in some type of punishment. So I'm not sure. And then you even have the law that says you are not to marry outside of Israel.
I'm wondering if we know that God has given him wisdom.
Well, not yet, because he's about to ask for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if he's putting his trust in wisdom, because, politically that makes sense.
But wisdom is from above. It's not earthly. So
Knowledge
wisdom, from above would be like, you don't do that. So he's starting off making decisions that show those two cracks in his foundation that we've uncovered. Identity, and he's not obeying the law. And I'm not sure why he thinks he could get away with that. But anyway, the case is he married this lady from Egypt for political purposes. Kings would do that. But what I want to focus on are the high places, because the high places were a little bit confusing for me. So I did some research on it, because, like Abraham had altars, right? Bethel was one of those places, formerly Luz, or Luz was its name. What was another one? Did Gilgal have a place? There are just several locations where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob set up altars to sacrifice and to worship to the Lord. But right here in this situation, the Bible lets us know that they didn't have yet a house for centralized worship of God. At this time, in Solomon's reign, there were 2 tents. So you had Moses' tabernacle operating alongside David's tabernacle. Now, Moses' tabernacle was 10 miles down from Jerusalem. And we know that the number 10 represents the law, like the 10 Commandments. And so anytime as a Christian you go back to the law, other than the law of love, you're going down. Okay, you're not going up. Because the strength of sin is in the law. Now, David's tabernacle was located in the city of David, and David did have a house that he had built for himself, I believe. Yeah, because that's what caused him to think, well, God doesn't have a house, because he is building his. So it appears that Solomon lived there. He married this chick from Egypt, and at Moses' tabernacle, they had the traditional sacrifices and rituals that were outlined in the Torah. Okay? But in David's tabernacle, the ark was located, and it was surrounded 24/7 with worshipers that were prophetic artists. I think a lot of people need to understand that prophets, musicians were prophets. Often prophets were very poetic in nature. You could see that in Isaiah and Jeremiah's writings in particular. But you've got this prophetic activity going around, which is a prophetic picture of the time that we live in. What's fascinating is the people of God could go and see the ark. They could participate in that exchange of presence. And so I've said over and over and over that David saw our time and he desired to pull it into his present. And he did. Now, here's one thing. Speaking of desire, I've been pondering this for the last several days. Just this is a side note. It has absolutely nothing. Well, maybe it has more to do with it than I think as far as David's tabernacle. Jesus is called the desire of the nations, right? Maybe we should make him desirable in our evangelistic efforts. You have a lot of people that will start off telling the person who doesn't know Jesus how terrible they are. And they're going to hell because they suck, right? Hell was never made for humans. God saw that as a problem. Therefore, he became man, so we don't have to go there. And so when I think about evangelism and the picture we should be portraying of the Lord, it could probably do us well to present him as something to be desired, that he loves him, he's your champion, he is the answer to whatever situation they face, but also he's the open door into a kingdom that goes on forever, where everything else will fall away. He doesn't, and here's proof. You heal their body, you cast out a devil, you do whatever it is, because signs follow those who believe. That was a requirement in the early church. If you didn't perform signs, you were not a believer. So nowadays, anyone can call themselves a believer because they can read the Bible and bring a sermon. The power of God was displayed. Am I correct?
Absolutely.
So I was thinking maybe we should make him desirable. And that might solve some of the evangelistic problem. Who wants to belong to sour-faced, complaining, stuck in the mud, sick, impoverished people? You can find more friends going to a bar than you can in the church a lot of the time. So we should be absolutely the most contagious thing people want. All right. Now, Solomon, he's starting off okay. I'm not really pleased, quite frankly, with the whole marriage thing, as you can tell. But it does say that he loved Yahweh. He walked in the statues, but he sacrificed on the high places. So, the high places in Hebrew is Bama, and it can refer to a physical high place like a mountain or a place of worship. Now, some of the high places were for worship of God, but they were predominantly places of idol worship.
Right.
And they became symbolic of idolatry of the Israelites. So, even though some used high places to worship God, the overall feel and purpose of them was idolatry.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the reason for that is goes all the way back to the Tower of Babel. The ancients believed the higher up you are, the closer you are to the gods. Okay? So with God, he dwelt in the tent. There was really no point in going up to a high place. It didn't make any sense. And it kind of makes you wonder if maybe they had, like, on a mountain, a lot of altars. Like one for Yahweh, one for Ashtoreth, one, like it makes you wonder if they just had a whole bunch of things conglomerating on top of mountains. I don't know. But they did cause a lot of problems. I dug a little bit deeper, and I found out that a high place was, quote, special or technical term in Canaanite religion designating a local shrine on a hill near a town or village, in contrast to the large temples located throughout the lands. Catholics do that. A lot of religions do that, but Catholicism, they do set up their shrines, and usually they are on high places, or you go to a particular, mountain region or something. Now, the Canaanite thing is, that's what they were supposed to drive out, not adopt their forms of worship. The Lexham Bible Dictionary says they were sites of worship often treated as unsanctioned for worshiping Yahweh. In other words, he didn't want them to do that, but they did it anyway. They were common in the ancient Near East and were very normal places of worship for the Canaanites. They felt that elevated places brought them closer to the gods in the heavens, and some high places were developed with roofs and even furniture for dining. You know that how Paul, he talks about meat offered or sacrificed to idols, and you've got some that have maybe a weaker faith, or they're newer in the Lord, and they think, oh my gosh, I better not eat this meat because it's sacrificed to idols, and he's basically like, meat's meat, it really doesn't matter. What they would do is, restaurants back then were temples to different gods, and so they would take some meat and they would offer it on an altar, and then through a ritual, and then they'd take that meat and they'd sell it in the market. So for new Christians that just came out of paganism, they're like, oh, no, I'm not going to partake of that, because they knew what was behind it. And Paul's like, yeah, it doesn't, that really doesn't matter. Just buy the meat, eat the meat, but if it bothers you, don't. That's the beauty about Holy Spirit. If it bothers you, don't do it. If you know that it bothers someone, then don't eat meat when you're around them, But that's kind of what we're talking about here, is you see this evolution of these high places where they began to build shrines and they would dine inside of them. And then, of course, it trickles on down into the New Testament as well. Do you have anything from Heiser? Has he talked about high places? Or
I was looking at a high place that we're supposed to tear down high places.
Right.
We don't have to have a high place to worship God on.
Yeah.
So I was looking at it as an enemy thing.
Yeah. Like a mixture, corruption, pollution into worship.
It's like having church in a bar.
I don't know. I wouldn't mind taking over bars with Jesus. I don't know, because to me, the high places is what it's, obviously pagan, idolatrous worship. And it's kind of like putting the ark on a cart, like the Philistines did. What the Philistines could get away with, not so much for the Israelites.
High places also were a place for human sacrifice.
Yeah.
And stuff like that.
Well, like the Inca, you have those pyramids, and they go up there. And, yeah. And here's another little rabbit trail, just real quick, because I forgot to mention this on the whole Jesus is the desire. We have a job to do, fellow believers and Christ followers, because he is the desire of the nations, and Marxists are looking for utopia. They want the Garden of Eden. They don't know it. Our job is to bring that to society. We should be the most hope-filled, optimistic, also realist people that there is. But when I'm looking into all of this, they want a society where there's no war, everybody gets along, they just work their area, there's free, there's distribution of wealth, there's not others that are above or below. All of that is what we had in the Garden of Eden. And so there's a hunger for that. So anyway, back to this. Sorry, these thoughts I was pondering, and I meant to get them out before I got started. Now, what can be confusing is you have in 1 Samuel 9:13, the prophet Samuel worshiping God at a high place in Ramah. Okay, so it appears that places of worship in pre-temple areas or pre-temple eras were acceptable sometimes, but after the temple's completion, it was considered an affront to the Lord. Here's where my question is: why didn't Solomon offer his sacrifices at Moses' tabernacle? See, he could have gone down there and he could have offered it there, but instead he went to a high place. So really the whole thing is confusing because Samuel did it too. You see what I mean? That's why I was like, what the heck is up with these high places? So it's almost like, well, everybody else is doing it, I'll do it. I don't know.
I thought his wives were doing it.
No, it says Samuel. Samuel worshiped God at a high place in Ramah. Yeah. Okay, so I don't know. Either way, it evolved into some bad stuff, and I believe it was idolatrous high places being referred to here in verse 3 because of what happens next in his life. But this is another crack in his foundation, and what I find very, very interesting is you don't see or read of David worshiping at a high place. He didn't do that. Now, I don't want to go in depth too much because we're going to get to this section, but I want to show the generational impact of Solomon not getting rid of these high places. One of the most famous high places was in the city of Dan in Judges 19:40 through 48. Dan's prophetic destiny was to be a judge. That was his identity according to Genesis 49:18. Now we know that Samson is one of the most famous of the Danite judges. But instead of walking in their destiny, they abdicated the anointing to judge, which required a knowledge of the law and the Lord, and they were judged. It's the same idea of Solomon. He didn't walk in the revelation he carried. You have to walk in it. You have to walk in what you know, especially if you're a teacher. You can't get up and teach stuff that you're not walking in or that you're not in the process of learning how to walk in, because that's where the deception enters. Deception enters when you think you're walking in something that you're not, just because you have knowledge. See, that's why we've got all these crazy professors that are literally getting paid in colleges to think up stupid stuff that then finds its way into media and academia. It spreads, and then you've got the government and all of this stuff. I mean, who in their right mind believes that you're not a male if you have a male part, right? I mean, it's insane. But these people sit around and come up with this crazy stuff. All these are social constructs. Well, it's the same thing here where Solomon had an incredible amount of revelation and he was not true to it. So you want to be true to what you know. You want it to be a bastion of, or a source of all your decisions and your thinking. So that's like, you know it's revelation when no one can convince you otherwise. I know God has already healed. That's it, the end. I don't care if I ever see it in my body or not. He already did it. Any problem is on me. I know that wealth is forever tied to the glory. No one can ever tell me it's not tied to the glory because the Bible says it is. It consistently ties wealth to the glory. And I won't ever put wealth as, spiritual riches or blah, blah, blah. No, wealth is money, land, possessions. The problem is there a purpose assigned to it? Right? So that's where we get in trouble. So no one will be able to tell me that stuff. So that means, and you have revelation, when someone tries to tell you the opposite, your inside is filled, it grates against you. It's like nails down a chalkboard, or Joseph getting in the sink and digging around with his claws. I mean, that's what it feels like. That's when you know you have revelation. And now, what's cool about revelation versus knowledge is revelation is intertwined into you. It's impossible to separate you from your revelation. That's how you know you're in it. It's now who you are. So, After Solomon died, his kingdom was divided because he refused to get rid of the high places. He refused to deal with his cracks. 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin, formed the lower kingdom of Judah, and the other 10 tribes formed the northern kingdom of Israel. Now, Jeroboam became their king due to a prophetic word from the Lord before Solomon even died. And again, we'll say this in depth, but I want to read this section. It's in 1 Kings 12, 26 through 33. I'm actually in the New King James Version. And it says, And Jeroboam said to his heart, now this is after he received a prophetic word that he would have the 10 tribes. Now the kingdom may return to the house of David if these people go up to offer sacrifices in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem. Then the heart of this people will turn back to their God, Rehoboam, king of Judah, and they will kill me and go back to Rehoboam, king of Judah. Therefore, the king asked advice. He was told to make 2 calves of gold and said to the people, Is it too much for you to go up to Jerusalem? Here are your gods, O Israel, which brought you up from the land of Egypt. Let's just stop right there. Okay, let's go all the way back to Aaron. Moses is up on the mountain having a good time with the Lord. Comes down. He sees the people acting like fools. Got this golden calf. They're dancing around it, having all kinds of unseemly behavior. The only ones that are sitting there like, OMG, are the Levites. And they're like, whoa, this is too much. Moses, obviously enraged, goes up to his brother, who should have been the one overseeing everything, and said, what happened? He's like, man, I don't know. We collected our jewelry, threw it in the fire, poof, this cow came out. Just bam, there it is. I mean, that's literally what he says. So you have this magical cow that just comes out of nowhere. Moses has to, start killing off people. I mean, it was crazy. That cow goes all the way to here. Is it not insane?
It's just a repeat of history.
It is a repeat. And not only that, it's double. Now the cow, poof, there's 2.
There's 2 of them.
Which shows you sin always multiplies. It always is worse the next generation around. That's why it's so important. The ground you take must be held. I mean, we're seeing it right now in Afghanistan. You always have to think generationally. The decisions you make today will impact your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren. At some point, there's going to be good or bad stuff that comes forth. The good thing is in Christ, you can reverse history. You can overturn things to where your mistakes don't have to be theirs. But the fact is, your children, your ceiling is their floor in all aspects. Spiritual, monetary, relationships, it doesn't matter. Your stability, all of that stuff, from right there, they're going to go upwards. If their floor is a sinful ceiling, then they'll just keep going down and down and down until they get born again. So here we see a calf all those years later through Aaron. Now Jeroboam has 2 calves of gold here, and he even used the same language that Aaron used, which brought you up from the land of Egypt. And then, to make matters worse, he places them in Bethel. And then he put the other in Dan. Why Dan? Because they were already idolatrous. They were already like that. So this thing became a sin. For the people went to worship before the one as far as Dan. He made shrines on the high places and made priests from every class of people who were not of the sons of Levi. Jeroboam ordained a feast on the 15th day of the 8th month, like the feast that was in Judah, and offered sacrifices on the altar. So he did at Bethel, sacrificing to the calves that he made. And at Bethel he installed the priests of the high places which he had made. So he made offerings on the altar which he had made at Bethel on the 15th day of the 8th month, in the month which he devised in his own heart. He came up with all this nonsense. And he ordained a feast for the children of Israel and offered sacrifices on the altar and burned incense. Why did he do all this? Because he didn't trust prophecy from the Lord. Oh, it is 8:15. Huh. He didn't trust the prophecy of the Lord. Because he did not trust the prophecy of the Lord, he set up a religious system that became so reprobate that became Samaria. Okay? And so that's why the Samaritan lady said, well, y'all say to worship on this mountain. We worship on this one. Which one's the correct one? Well, I mean, he could have obviously gone into the whole thing of the calf and the, like, hey, you can't, that's not good. He could have done all of that. But instead he said, the Father, he could care less as far as mountains. He's looking for those who worship him in spirit and in truth. So he just took that whole argument away. But that's why there was such hatred between Judah or Judea and Samaria. Because here's what happened. Because of the gross idolatry that came through Jeroboam, they came under judgment, the 10 tribes, and Assyria came in and wiped out that nation. And their idolatry spread down into Judah. So that's why there was such an intense hatred with the Israelites between them and the Samaritans. Isn't that interesting? And then Bethel, I mean, that was the very place where Jacob bumped into God. If we think what we establish in one generation can't become a stronghold of the devil, we're deceived. You always have to have a plan for the work to continue once you're gone. Now, back to Solomon. And again, we'll get into this even more. But in 1 Kings 3 through 9, it says, he's already married this lady from, Egypt. And he didn't get rid of the high places. And it says, and the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the great high place. Well, I guess he did. I guess he would sometimes do that. Solomon used to offer 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night and said, ask what I shall give you. And Solomon said, you have shown great and steadfast love to your servant David, my father, because he walked before you in faithfulness and righteousness and uprightness of heart towards you. And you have kept for him this great and steadfast love, and have given him a son to sit on his throne this day. And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of David my father. Although I am but a little child, I don't know how to go out or come in. And your servant is the midst of your people, whom you have chosen, a great people, too many to be numbered or counted for multitude. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil, for who is able to govern your great people. I love this. Oh, by the way, I did look up the great high place and what that meant. It was the top. It was in rank among all the other high places. But if you think about it, God lives on a mountain, and Zion was on a mountain. It's on the tallest part. So I don't think it was necessarily the mountain part that bothered him as much as it was what was happening on those high places. Anyway, so here he has this encounter with God. He could have asked anything. But remember, David prepared Solomon to ask for wisdom. Time arrives, Solomon does that. And they're thinking, scholars say he's probably about 20 years old. So he's awfully young. And not only that, I'm sure ruling in the shadow of his dad was a little intimidating. The great David. He obviously recognized his need. Now, the word understanding is the ability to hear, listen, and obey. It literally means to hear, to obey, and then to listen. You can't listen without first hearing. So hearing is the ability to perceive sound. Listening is the ability to understand what the sound is communicating. And obedience is required to execute the will, the intent behind the sound. So Solomon knew the only voice he needed to hear was God's. Govern means to judge, to govern. It's more inclusive than our modern idea of a judge. Back in Solomon's time, it included all the facets and functions of government, the executive, legislative, and judicial. So all these functions fell to him. The word discern means to discern, to perceive, to observe, to pay attention to be intelligent, to be discreet, to understand. It's not a sure thing. Many can hear, but not always understand or discern. God is the one who gives and conceals understanding. Okay, verse 10. It pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this, and God said to him, because you've asked this and have not asked for yourself long life or riches or the life of your enemies, which he didn't need to, he'd already killed them all, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right, behold, I now do according to your word. Behold, I give you a wise and discerning mind, so that none like you has been before you, and none like you shall arise after you. I give you also what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that no other king shall compare with you all your days. And if you walk in my ways, keeping my statutes and my commandments as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your days. Notice he keeps saying that. He's trying to get it in his head. And Solomon awoke, and behold, it was a dream. Then he came to Jerusalem, stood before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and offered up burnt offerings and peace offerings, and made a feast for all his servants. I love that all of this happened in a dream. Now, first of all, when he says, no one will be as wise as you, nor rise up after you as wise, we know that he could not be referring to people in general, because Jesus is wisdom. And he came after them. We have the mind of Christ. Wisdom is in us. What he was referring to was kings. Okay? And but what I like about this is the dream aspect. If you look in the Bible, dreams are crucial. Joseph had two that helped him through tremendous tribulation and betrayal. David had dreams. Solomon had dreams. Jacob had dreams. In fact, Jesus used Jacob's dream when he was speaking to Nathanael and said, you will see the angels ascending and descending the Son of Man. He was saying, that's me. Jacob dreamed of me. You know, so it's very interesting. So don't dismiss your dreams, even the weird ones. You know, just number one, some people do because they're a dream. Some people do it because they seem weird. Some don't recognize their importance, and so they'll dismiss them. I mean, dreams can come from pizza. They can come from the enemy. They can come from your soul. You know, a lot of dreams that we have is actually our soul trying to work out problems, conundrums. God gave us that ability to dream so it could figure out things. So I find it very kind of the Lord to give us the ability to dream so we can process those things. That's why people say sleep on it. In fact, one of the laws that the Pharisees broke in dealing with the Lord with corporal punishment, is they weren't supposed to deliver a death verdict without sleeping on it. That was the law of the Sanhedrin. They had to sleep on it first, and they didn't do that. All right, so here comes his first test. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I think it's interesting, before he got the dream and the wisdom, that he sacrificed in the high places that we see right here, that he returned to Jerusalem, stood before the ark of the Lord's covenant, and then he burnt offerings. So after he got wisdom, he went and did it right.
Right. I thought that.
I didn't notice that. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, smart.
Yeah, smart.
Yeah.
I tell you.
So it sounded like his heart was in the right place, but after he got wisdom, he knew he hadn't. Maybe he thought, I better do this right.
Well, and you know what's interesting is if you think of wisdom, wisdom is presence.